I didn't break the planet. It was this way when I found it, all right?
Everybody laughed when I first said I wanted to be a comedian. Well, they're not laughing now, are they?
You know what it's laminated, don't you? To catch the tears of joy.
It's a Celtic phoenix. People are thankfully being stupid again.
Welcome to Gurus of Comedy.
With your host, Dave Keeshan.
Welcome to Gurus of Comedy. I'm your host, Dave Keeshan, and I have on the line from the Netherlands, Stephen Morgan.
Hello.
How are you doing, Stephen?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you doing, Dave?
Excellent. Stephen is based in the Netherlands in a town called Nijmegen.
That's right.
And he's a Welsh comedian who has done a bit of travelling. You spent some time in Australia, like myself.
That's right.
And some time you're originally from the UK, but you're now a performing comedian in the Netherlands. How's that going?
Yeah, it's very different. I mean, like, as far as not speaking the first language, the Netherlands is kind of like easy mode of expat life in that regards, because English is so widely spoken here. But even so, there's this pros in the sense that I can go for such a long time and hear other people's conversations, and if they're saying things which would usually infuriate me, that I don't know what they're saying, so it just sounds like some sort of beautiful sing-song words that wash over me. But on the other hand, when you actually need to get stuff done, especially when it's like important stuff that involves the government, everything gets a lot more complicated.
But do you like the Dutch way of life? Does it speak
yeah
to some...
yeah I really like it here. Yeah, I mean, it's things aren't particularly stable in the UK at the moment, so it's kind of nice not to be there. But yeah, it's a sort of, I know it sounds very cliche to talk about the Netherlands in this way, but something about the fact that everyone just kind of like cycles everywhere, and it's such an easy and casual thing where you don't feel like you're in fear of your life every 5 minutes when you do it, makes everything just a lot easier to do, to get further, to live further out and have no problem with that. I don't know. It's hard to explain unless you actually go through it, but it's really nice.
I've spent a little bit of time there, a bit more ordered than we're used to in elsewhere. So, Stephen is on today to discuss comedy in other countries. We started discussing where language is not your own, but my travel experiences with being Irish in Australia and yourself being Welsh in Australia and around, I think it's kind of been informed. Like, I personally started off doing comedy over there, and people just really responded to my accent. And I actually had people, I didn't understand a word you said, but it was hilarious. And I didn't know if that was a compliment or an insult, It was like, I did learn to sort of say thank you to everything, but it was kind of strange. It's like, am I just like performing and they're just like hearing my sing-song voice, or do I actually have real content,
Well, that's the thing. It's like, I suppose it's something which in comedy you get to learn very quickly, which is what the people have the first impressions of you and how they react to that. But once you factor in, things such as just, being unfamiliar or like of a different cultural background to whoever it is that you're performing in front of, then it's amazing how suddenly you can go, especially as like a white male as myself, can go from feeling like the power majority, in this patriarchy that we have, to instead feeling like someone who's kind of like, hey, wait a minute, I'm more than just a British guy, guys. Just chill out. There's more to me than this. There's more to me than this posh sounding accent, according to Australian ears.
I've read the book Judy Carter's Comedy Bible. She sort of says in stand-up, if there's something unusual about you, something unique, comment on it straight away, so it's out of the way. So I found like I'd always have to sort of make the comment or a reference to being Irish as soon as possible, just so it was gone. Because it's like the audience is waiting for you to say something and they're almost not paying attention until you say something. And then when it's out of the way, you can get on with the rest of your set.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I remember that there was a guy in Brisbane where I was living. There was a comedian called Ashwin Segkar, and he was of Indian origin, but like had been living in New Zealand for a long time and was now living in Australia. And, you can imagine there was a lot of kind of like a reflex thing that, people wanted him to talk about, hey, what's it like being in Australia and being not from Australia and then, being Indian, and wanted to play on a lot of kind of stereotypes and things like that. Whereas his style was very different. He wanted to explore so many different things, and he was finding it really frustrating to find that balance of being able to get that part of it out of the way as quickly as possible, or even find a way of not addressing it at all, and then be able to get on with his material.
I bristled against it for a while, I have to sort of say, and then I kind of began to realize, at least in Australia, it was coming from a place of respect, as in there seemed to be a good reputation about the Irish. They kind of enjoyed us speaking, they enjoyed listening to us. So I never really experienced any malice behind the idea of why they'd want to hear it. It was just, and once I kind of leaned into it and kind of got comfortable with it, I kind of did my little, maybe first 3 to 5 minutes on that, and then I could kind of go off and explore different things, and they were much more receptive. And I suppose that's kind of when I moved to the next phase. I don't know if you've any experience with this, is like, I lived there for so long. I mean, I was there for 10 years. I began to experience the culture as a native. And, you find some kind of things you just didn't think were right. And you kind of say, well, I want to comment on that. But there would be this kind of, well, who do you think you are to tell us what you think of our culture because you're not from here? And like, I had a few things where, just the Australians' attitude to some things. The joke was written one way. It was sort of funny. It'd be funny to people outside of Australia. But if you deliver it wrong to the Australians and then you're just taking aim at them, it would fall dead flat.
Absolutely.
But if you kind of restructured the joke and give a more jovial way and kind of send it back out again, I had a comment about like how Aussies can kind of be a bit racist. They have this hatred of a bird called an Indian myna bird. I kind of said, well, I don't know why you don't like them, because, they're an introduced species, they're terribly aggressive, and everywhere they go, they kick out the native populace, And I said, well, that sounds pretty Australian to me. And
there you go.
and it seemed to work.
Yeah.
But it didn't work first time or the second time. It was kind of a process to... And I think if an Australian kind of came out with that to Australians, there wouldn't be quite as much pushback.
I mean, I think you're completely right. And it's a funny and hard to quantify thing, because on the one hand, it's that your delivery and like whether you've got that confidence behind your delivery can very much make a difference as to how an audience will receive it. But there's also like an instinctual thing when you're, in a country which you're not originally from, that you feel like you have to at least be careful of things that you might accidentally say that or do that are, disrespectful to the local culture. Now, with Australia, the overlap perhaps with, like, say, Ireland or the UK is a lot bigger because of those sorts of things. And in the Netherlands as well, there's not so many things. There are certain subjects which I will avoid because I just do not feel like I have I'm just not that kind of comedian as well. I'm not someone who's going to go delve into a lot of political kind of material. But, I remember when I went to Japan and performed there, I was very wary of there being so many sort of cultural rules and things like this, and not wanting to basically derail anything else that I was doing through inadvertently breaking those sorts of things that I wasn't supposed to do.
Yeah, well, I think when you grow up in a culture, you kind of, even by osmosis, kind of get a feel for what you can and can't talk about. But when you arrive into it, you don't quite necessarily, no one gives you the handbook and tells you what's okay and what's not okay. And you only learn really by mistakes, I suppose.
It's true, but then I think there's definitely like a thing where there's certain subjects where, even if, say, someone local were to make the joke, I don't know, it's kind of like if you got siblings or something and like you got a big brother who keeps picking on the little brother and just like makes their life a living hell. But then, say, someone else picks on that little brother and then suddenly they're like, hey, you leave him alone, and it's that kind of protective element, like only I can make his life a living nightmare. Come on. And I'm just like...
There's a great interview with George Carlin. He says exactly that. The interviewer was asking him about something like this and said, well, when you go to a town and people see you and they say, hey, what are you doing in a shithole like this? But they can say it to you and it's a joke, but you can't go up on stage and say, oh, what about this shithole? Even though they've just said it to you, is that they won't respond the same way. You have to kind of be part of it to kind of make fun of it somewhat. And if you're not, you have to tread a lot carefully.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, it's funny as well how... like a friend of mine who was an American comedian, female comedian who was out in Brisbane too, when he was mentioned that with your Irish background, that it was like there is, I would say, definitely a positive response to, having a background of Irish there. But like, I'm guilty myself of sometimes if someone says that they're American, being like, which kind of American, the gun American or the other kind, this is just like a little wariness of what I can or can't say. And then, so, and I appreciate that I shouldn't be judging someone in that moment. But yeah, she was like so it was kind of like almost like a PTSD response to some of the responses she was getting from audiences, because there was so much of it that was just about her Americanism and the fact that people just wanted to comment on, say, the religious aspects or the gun-toting aspects or the just general insanity that is even worse right now than it ever has been before. But, it's that whole thing of it depends on where you're from. People will basically respond to that stereotype. And if that stereotype is a a relatively positive one, then you got lucky.
That brings up a bigger point, I think, for comedy in general. We were just saying inside just the English language, particularly being in such a small country that Ireland is, we're only 4 million. Growing up, there's no real content. So I grew up on UK content, American content, to a lesser extent Australian.
Yeah.
And I don't know, in the UK, I don't know if you consumed any Irish content. Father Ted doesn't count.
Okay.
That was made in the UK. It felt like we were kind of moving up the scale. Like, so when I moved to Australia, I was kind of preloaded with a few things even before I got there. Whereas someone going the other way, like an American going to Australia or to the UK, I don't know if they'd be as aware of the culture they're going into quite the same way as I was aware going in, having not even lived there.
Yeah, because it's amazing how much you do pick up on culture. I mean, I have to say, coming to the Netherlands, a country which, I have been constantly since moving here learning how little I actually know about the country. And, there's this parts of you that almost wants to hide the surprise when you learn something which should just be common knowledge. And and then I kind of think back to experiences where I might be in the UK or something, and someone might be like, "You do some, you drink tea how many times a day?" Or even just like those like really like pointless stereotypes. But it's true. There's like certain things which are just so like inherent and just so like normal that I just kind of like I feel like I have to internalize them because I'm in my head like going, "Oh my God, these guys really love frying their food. This is." Like everything is fried, but I have to just kind of just say, "Oh no, it's delicious. Thank you. This is great. Thank you."
So like that's exactly it. And just growing up, like there's certain kind of phrases that are on TV that you could kind of just drop into a set that if you're part of the culture will work, but you go somewhere else, it won't. Like, what the hell is that? I have no idea what that is. And it's kind of like I find it's made me kind of play a bit more generic in a good way. That it's like I think my material can kind of work at a more international level. I've stripped out the inherently only Irish people will know bit. I know kind of a bit now what Australians kind of will get and maybe not say it because only Aussies will get it. And then when you kind of start looking that way, you kind of get the American stuff, you kind of get the UK stuff, even Kiwi, South African, that type of way.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. And that's something which I really struggled with at the beginning because that was, I started comedy outside of my native country. So right at the beginning, I didn't realize how much of my just general kind of like way of getting on with people depended on my cultural references, things that I was just like, things which I didn't even realize, things as stupid as like, say, a themed song from an advert, just like, it's hard to explain how much this stuff just like gets under your skin and becomes like part of the national sort of like communication fabric. And then I get out there and suddenly I'm kind of, like you said, you have to genericize it, or at the very least find a way to explain the thing that you're saying in a way that is simultaneously like interesting enough that if you knew it already, that you would just find it funny to hear someone describing it that way. But if you didn't know it already, then you would just actually learn something, but without feeling patronized. So that has to actually become like a precursor of something that you might mention, which is in itself then becomes a skill that you have to develop if you're trying to do something which you really think is worth, the preamble, or really worth the build up to it. And if you can find a way to keep that interesting, then maybe that bit can stay.
I totally agree with all of that. I think it's like training with weights. Like I then had the reverse problem. I actually came back to my home country and then had to perform. And then all of a sudden, Jesus, everyone sounds like me. So that kind of... that advantage I had just disappeared and said, "Well, no, my material has to be funny now." Oh God.
That's it. You start to think like, I've got this genericized material, but then what you don't realize is you started to make this kind of like very niche material for a particular situation which only exists in a very particular place. Like, for example, a lot of the audiences that I'll perform to are actually of expats from like multiple places. And there's nothing, and one of the easy things that any like comedian performing in English here can do is say something, "Hey, the Dutch do this," something about, say, narrow staircases, something that's not like the completely obvious, but the things which are just like that one step in of obvious that you might notice after being here for 2 weeks. And audiences guaranteed, no matter what, they will lose it. They will just be like, yes, because they are the minority in this position. And they're suddenly feeling like, yes, I think that too. And someone else is vocalizing my thoughts. And,
I performed one time in Berlin. It just so happened to be the 20th anniversary of reunification. Just pure coincidence that was the date. A lot of expats were in. I was an English club. Everybody was doing this, difference between communism and capitalism. I think every single one of them that was kind of an expat local, if that's not an oxymoron. That was all their kind of material. And I kind of come in doing Star Trek jokes, you know. It was just because that wasn't where I'd come from. But maybe that's just kind of the way it kind of, you do fall to a kind of common thing. The other thing I've noticed, particularly, and this is just localization, in Sydney there's a kind of a more working class suburb called Blacktown. And it was amazing how many people would just use like Blacktown as a punchline or a setup for a joke of kind of this is going to be rough and ready. Right. And then there was a TV show or a group of guys in Oz called the Chasers. Chaser.
Yeah. I know that, yeah.
I think they're mostly based down in Melbourne. And down in Melbourne, it appears to be Frankston. And they had like this set where it's, I was in fucking Frankston, and I was out in Frankston with this, like, fucking Frankston. And like that's just meant to be his bit, and the audience are like laughing on their ass. And I'm just kind of wondering, like, is that lazy comedy, you know? 'Cause it's like,
I remember there's a comedian, I can't remember who it was, and I'm trying to remember the exact quote now, but there's someone who said that there's like, whenever they go to a new town, whatever they're going for, they ask 3 questions of someone who lives there. And one of them, is like, what's like the lower working class like area or town or something in this region? And there's basically 3 things which then they can copy and paste into whatever material they have. And it does, and it's the fact is the material itself is just quite generic. But then suddenly, by playing that particular place, it makes them sound like they're talking about that place. And by introducing these other factors, which actually are so universal, suddenly the audience are just like going, "Oh yeah, I know that. Yeah, he knows this place." And suddenly you sound like a local, even though you've basically just copied and pasted.
I never actually went and wrote that joke, even though I could sort of see it seemed to be quite easy to do. You know, if you just kind of wanted to be. I call it lazy. That's me.
Well, it is really, because I mean, like, it's like, because this is the thing, which is, you know, you don't want to play to the lowest common denominator thing. If you want to do material that you respect yourself, you know, you don't want to kind of just, especially in stereotypes and things like that. I don't know. They'd always just kind of feels like you're leaving a bit of taste in your mouth because you're playing and you're on something which on the whole isn't even that true. It's just the fact that it's something which, you know, people have like decided, that's what those people do.
So getting back to your more specific situation and probably more the original topic, I used to always find it odd when someone who was a non-English speaker would come up to me and say they really enjoyed my set. Usually like someone spoke Spanish or French. I was always like, you could understand it? Because I just have a tendency to speak quite fast. So fast, with an accent. I just thought, I just was losing them. I said, no, I enjoyed it. Particularly being in the Netherlands. Have you ever kind of experienced anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, because like I said, there's a lot of the audiences are expat audiences here. So you're often performing to groups of people who are from all over. And actually, one of the stereotypes I was talking about is the fact that Dutch audiences are known for being more reserved. And this is one of those things which often gets played on as well. So I've seen the number of times I've seen a comedian come up out on stage and say, okay, who here is from the Netherlands? And, you know, you get the woo. And then you go, who here is not from the Netherlands? Ooh. And it's kind of, you know, the part with the Netherlands is kind of like, oh, okay, it's going to be a tough night. Things like this, which in turn means, I don't know how true it is. I don't know I've experienced it to an extent, but I don't know if it's self-fulfilling prophecy in that sort of regards, especially if someone is being told right at the beginning of a set that they're not going to enjoy it or be responsive. But yeah, I mean, like, I've had all sorts of responses from all sorts of people, but then I do feel like, you know, I moved out of Wales when I was like just as I was turning an adult, and I moved into England, and even then, like, my accent diluted like significantly because I was experiencing things where suddenly I would be trying to talk about something seriously, and they wanted to hear me say like toothbrush again, because, you know, oh, you say it again, oh, it's so funny. And it's like you just feel like, oh, I'm not your clown. And I don't want to.
Oh yeah, I used to be, you know, just like, oh, say potato, now dance a jig.
Right.
You know.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah, that sort of thing. And it's like, and you know, it's like, and I'm not saying that it was coming from a place of like, you know, these people weren't trying to humiliate me or whatever. It was just the fact that, yeah, there was something unusual about the way that I was talking to them, and very quickly I just found myself just losing my accent, and now, you know, living in multiple countries, now it's just like a hybrid bastardization of all sorts of different things. But the thing is I guess that one thing that I have kind of focused on is trying to be clear. So
yeah, well, I think that's important. I am originally from the south of Ireland, Cork, and they speak a lot faster than this. When I arrived in Australia, I was kind of speaking with my normal accent at speed, and a lot of these people were too polite to say they couldn't understand me, but you just get used to seeing that glazed look come over their face. They'd be nodding politely, and you'd be talking for 5 minutes, and then you go, "You didn't understand a word I said." I said, "No, I didn't. But why didn't you say something?"
That's exactly it. Yeah, and it's that whole thing as well. It's like you don't notice it straight away, but there might be something you say where you're expecting like a facial cue, not even for them to say something, but it might be something that says like, "Oh, that was quite interesting, funny," or something, or even just kind of like, "That was boring." But when their face remains the same glazed expression, you're like, "Ah, you didn't understand that. No, that was nothing."
Bringing it back to comedy, is it that as a comedian, are you obliged to be more clear then, to make yourself more understood, so you have a greater chance for the greater choice of the audience?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's important regardless of language, because even if you have a thick accent, you still want to be understood, right? You want to find a way that you're not using, that's not becoming a point of obstruction, because that's important, because you words are your material. That's how you're trying to get things across. I guess for some people might have accents where they don't even have to consider that, or never encountered that as a problem. So but and it's not even as if it's consciously come out as a thing. I mean, like with comedy anyway, there's nothing worse than when you've got someone on stage and you're struggling to hear them. There's like psychological cues that make you dislike that person if like the mic is too low, and that just applies no matter where you are in the world. So this is like another thing in that sort of area, where if people cannot hear you or cannot understand you, then well, they may just like you anyway for the other sort of aspects of you, which and then they'll enjoy you as like almost like a clown of sorts, or they but the fact is they won't actually take anything away from the material that you're giving them.
So that brings it kind of to the next level, that some humor is designed almost with a built-in play on words or play on imagery that's kind of almost inherent to the language itself. And then if you're dealing with an international audience, like I always found Aussies use the word root for sex, but other people don't. I actually work in microchip design, and we route designs. And one time we were telling them, "Oh yeah, we started routing the design last night. It's been routed all night, and now it's been completely routed today." And the Aussies were like on the floor in stitches, and you're like, "Oh, come on, guys, come on." Grow up, while I'm writing it down, so I'm going to do it on stage next time.
Yeah, that's it. You've got to be careful. Those pronunciations are the ones which you just, what can you do, right? You learn it once, then in the future you're like, okay, now I know. Fine.
But for more the international audience, like I'm just kind of wondering, is like some of that play, is it limiting, or is one limited? Or is it like a tool in the tool set you're not allowed to use or not able to use, or
I guess because there's not as much is there a word of that? Universality. There's not so much there. Well, there is, but that isn't so much in the language. So like you say, like a pronunciation of a word. I mean, when you're living in a country where you don't speak the first language, you get so used to the fact that people will mispronounce things, and, you won't call them out on it because, if you can understand what the word is, fine, we can still talk. It becomes something that it no longer becomes a thing. But then again, it's like there are other things with this universality. But I suppose if you were to say root, there might be some people in the audience who may laugh or maybe kind of like chuckle to themselves. And there's also going to be other people who, even if that's not the case for the translation, say, for example, someone laughs, then they realize what they found funny. And then there's that ripple effect of the fact that they then find it funny, that they found it funny, because then that's now become a joke. So it's still
I think you hit on a different thing that I've seen many times, is that a room of like 5 people is worse than a room of 30. And there's a transition point where if there's a laugher in the room, they give license to the people who might have laughed in the room of 5.
Right.
But
that's so true.
So it's kind of, it's not like there seems to be like a crossover point I find around 20 or 25 where you have, naturally have a laugher, and then just the whole experience changes because these other people are now laughing who they just might have just like nodded and say, that was quite humorous,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like those people, sometimes I want to go up to them at the end of the show and say, can I pay you and you can come to my shows indefinitely?
Oh, they're gold.
Exactly.
They should make it that professional job.
Seriously, it's amazing. Like, and people just, unless you've actually experienced it from the stage, you cannot like quite appreciate how much it does help. Especially when you see the same comedians doing the same material in like different rooms, because you get to know the same people on the same circuit, and then you see this one person, you see the difference it makes to everyone's material, even someone who's like just starting out for the first time, and suddenly you're like, this atmosphere is electric, and I wish I could say it was because of us, but it's that guy that out there and his funny laugh.
It is a bit of a science if one wants to take it apart, and little things like that. I knew a guy, he used to throw me off. He seemed to laugh at everything. I used to find I found it a bit distracting when I first experienced it, and then kind of saw more and more of him being out in audiences and just seeing how that just seemed to just improve the whole night. And I was like, I want him. I'm having a show. He's getting a free ticket.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, I suppose that is the flip side, is if someone gets to the point where they're kind of like uncontrollable about anything and everything, then you have no choice but to like address it as a thing of its own. Or if they've got one of those laughs that's simultaneously contagious, but also like a little unique, you can't just ignore it.
What else would you kind of observations as a UK comedian, expat comedian in Europe? Brexit, I suppose Brexit has kind of been a big thing. Has that dominated your material? What people want to hear from you?
Well, yeah, I mean, you become a de facto spokesman of Brexit I have in some regards, not just on stage, but with anyone not from the UK, and not by choice, just by what do you think of this? People will always relay things from the news, with that.
Well, I always think that's the expat curse.
Yeah, is that
you're expected to be an expert on your own country, even though you don't know anything about it.
Yeah, exactly. And suddenly you feel really self-conscious because you're like, oh God, just leave me alone. Okay, I don't know. Okay.
I have to go home and spend like 6 hours reading up on like the history of Breton laws and and the laws of Ireland.
So if I don't know this, then they're going to judge the whole country on my back, and I got to at least give them something. But yeah, the whole Brexit thing has been a tough one because it's like. Yeah, I've because actually at one point as well, it was something that got me so angry that every time I tried to do material on it, my mood would change. So if I would just like even dip into something, if I was just riffing on something with an audience member, I could like feel myself starting to get angry because it was something which was just like directly affecting me in my particular position at that time, and so I was struggling to kind of find that distance of it and what it actually was. And I know that some people can really feed on that in their material and things like this, but for me it's kind of as I said, it's not really kind of like my style. It's not what I do in general. So to me, when I'm talking about these things, they become very real in my head, so it's something which I struggle then to turn into something comedic. But yeah, people do expect a certain thing from you, and it's funny as well when you see like some touring comedians from the UK and things like that, because there are a lot who come here for that, and it's amazing how many you see who can be quite good. And me, as someone who's from the UK, can appreciate a lot of the kind of like cultural references and nuances and things like this, because they are very specific to having grown up, say, in a particular country at a particular time. And I can see audiences just being slightly baffled at it all, kind of like feeling like the delivery is strong enough that this person clearly knows what they're doing. Must be good, but I don't really get what they're doing. So there's kind of like this middle ground sort of response to what they're actually doing. And yeah, there have been a few times where you kind of like, you talk to someone afterwards and they're kind of like, oh, I don't know what happened there tonight, that's the thing, which was like, well, this probably is the first time they performed outside of their own country to an audience, which is an experience of its own.
I just want to thank you for coming on. Is there anything you would like to push? Any socials, anything?
Oh, yeah, well, shows not so much at the moment. I'm still housebound. But yeah, I mean, I've got like a web series called Real Power Talk, which is on YouTube and Facebook, where I interview bands and characters. The bands don't know that they are being interviewed by a character. So that's improv based, can often descend into something quite farcical. And then, I've got a Facebook page, Stephen Morgan Hero, where it's got all the dates that I do have or will have, or courses that I'm running and things like that. So, I think those are the two big major ones.
Okay, I'll throw them into the show notes so anyone can click on them. I've been your host, Dave Keeshan. We are on every single podcast platform I could find. So if you'd like us or review us on them, that would be great. And we will see you again. Goodbye.